The signal was impossible. Not weak, not intermittent, not a remnant. It was deliberate. A frequency buried beneath kilometers of rock and sand, old enough to predate any civilization, yet precise enough to pierce through my instruments like it was meant for me. At first, I thought it was a glitch. Scanners don't detect absences. They don't react to nothing. But the second pulse hit, and everything changed. The ground beneath me seemed to shift ever so slightly, a subtle vibration I could feel in my boots. Not the wind, not tectonics, something else, something aware. When I saw the faint outline beneath the desert floor, I froze. It wasn't random debris. It was a structure, massive, circular, segmented, half buried like the planet itself had tried to hide it. Its matte black surface shimmered faintly under the sun, absorbing light as though the desert wanted to keep it secret. I crouched, running a secondary scan. The readings didn't just lag. They hesitated, fluctuating in a way no human-engineered system should. Power signatures flickered in spaces where there was nothing. Gravity shifted, not enough to make me fall, but enough to make me doubt everything I thought I knew. Most salvagers would walk away. I didn't, because ships like this aren't abandoned. They're waiting for someone curious, someone foolish, someone capable of understanding the wrong kind of signals. I ran a pulse along the exposed surface. The sand responded, not collapsing, flowing, organizing itself into channels I hadn't disturbed. It was communicating subtly, precisely, quietly. The scale of what I'd found was staggering. If this was just a wreck, the desert wouldn't have reacted. If it was just a ship, it wouldn't be actively engaging with me. This was something different. Something alive in a way machines shouldn't be. In the first 30 seconds, you need to know this. This isn't a simple restoration. This is a first contact with a system that has existed longer than history itself. And it already knows I'm here. If you want to see what happens when alien technology buried for centuries wakes up for the first time and begins interacting with a human operator, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment because the journey is about to get dangerous, unpredictable, and completely unlike anything you've seen in sci-fi salvage. I didn't step onto the ship immediately. First, I studied the desert itself. That's the rule most salvagers ignore. When a vessel feels wrong, the environment will tell you why before the machine ever does. I planted microseismic probes around the perimeter, expecting nothing more than erosion patterns or sand movement. What I got instead was rhythm. Not chaotic, not random, slow, deliberate oscillations, almost like the desert was breathing. Pressure shifted beneath my boots at intervals too precise to be natural. The probes recorded gravity, fluctuations radiating outward from the buried hull, perfectly in sync with the faint pulsing I had sensed in the signal. It wasn't dormant. The vessel was idling, waiting, observing. I circled the exposed segments, scanning for an access point. My gloves brushed over the hull and discovered the first seam. Invisible until touched, smooth and intact, as if it had never been breached. No corrosión, no scratches, just purpose. Whatever sealed this vessel had done so intentionally, and it had done it perfectly. I sent a low-power diagnostic pulse, barely enough to wake a dead circuit. The desert responded. Sand around the hull shifted subtly, forming shallow channels that mirrored the ship's architecture. Dunes bent along invisible lines, aligning as if the planet itself remembered the ship's geometry. Even my comm system joined the pattern. Instruments locked into a time code they had never encountered before. Nothing about this wreck behaved according to human rules. It wasn't broken. It was calculating. Finally, I authorized external access. A panel slid open silently, revealing an interior dimly illuminated. Not dark, but conserving energy. No alarms, no hits, no triads. Just a soft hum resonating through the hull, a sound I felt in my chest rather than my ears. It became clear in that moment. This wasn't salvage as we knew it. This was interaction. The ship didn't need a mechanic or a hacker. It needed acknowledgement. Recognition that someone had arrived who could interface with its systems on its terms, in a way no human guild had ever imagined. Every restorer has that first moment inside a ship that doesn't want to be found. And in this case, the moment wasn't frightening. It was compelling. The interior didn't look alien at first. That was the unsettling part. No chauchik panels, no glowing horns, no visibly alien script. Just smooth modular surfaces arranged and repeating, almost mathematical patterns. A language designed to be understood eventually. I flooded the space with every scanner I had. For the first time since arriving, the data stabilized. But there was a problem. The readings didn't match reality. Every long-range sensor, every orbital sweep, every previous salvage attempt had been misled. Not because the ship was invisible, it was actively hiding. Every power signature had been diffused, mass estimates slightly altered, structural integrity disguised as sand erosion. The wreck wasn't broken. It was misdirecting. The deeper I probed, the more the interior revealed itself. Beneath the outer hull lay a layered lattice, each segment functioning as structure and processor simultaneously. No distinction between hardware and software. Every surface thought, every corridor calculated. The ship wasn't a machine. It was a thinking system. And then I found the core chamber at the center of the ringed architecture. Unlike the rest of the ship, it wasn't guarded. It wasn't sealed. It was waiting. A shallow depression in the floor pulsed faintly, perfectly in rhythm with the desert outside. I knelt and extended my hand into the field. The reaction was instantaneous. Not with power, not with motion, but with context. My visor filled with fragmented projections, stress maps of the planet's crust, probability curves, timelines stretching centuries ahead. The ship wasn't malfunctioning. It was managing something far larger than itself. And then a line appeared, stark and deliberate. Status, containment active. Containment of what? The system didn't say. Not yet. At that moment, I realized this wasn't about salvaging a ship. It was about understanding a system humanity was never meant to control. Everything about its design, its secrecy, its integration with the environment, its misdirection, existed to keep it stable for centuries. I had a choice. Step back and leave it buried, or step forward and begin interacting with something that would never let me forget my presence. Containment sounded stable. It wasn't. Not really. The system had endured centuries of isolation, quietly maintaining balance across the planet's crust, subtly redistributing stress through forces no human could fully measure. Until now, it had done this without anyone knowing, without anyone interfering, without a single operator. But the moment it recognized me, everything shifted. The projections sharpened, timelines collapsing from centuries into decades, then years. What I had thought was a core wasn't a power source. It was a regulator. Every microfracture in the lattice, every subtle misalignment, every deviation in harmonic resonance affected planetary stability. The desert had been moving not because of wind, not because of erosion, but because the system had been channeling energy into the ground, redistributing weight, subtly holding the planet together. I asked the interface for shutdown. The ship didn't refuse. It showed me the result. Containment disengaged, and the planet didn't explode. It sagged. Forces migrated sideways into regions not meant to carry them. The projections displayed a slow, creeping disaster. Deserts expanding, coastlines shifting, cities and ecosystems slowly destabilizing. No singular catastrophe. Just a silent planetary unraveling, one adjustment at a time. That's when the truth hit. Walking away was no longer an option. This system didn't care about intent. Leaving it untouched wasn't safe. It was deadly. Ignorance wasn't neutral. It was catastrophic. The interface updated again. Operator intervention window active. I could restore the ship and bind myself to a machine that never slept, never forgot, never paused, or leave, knowing exactly how the planet would fail without intervention. The choice was terrifying, but in that moment, I understood that some systems, no matter how alien, do not allow neutrality. This wasn't just salvage. It was responsibility on a planetary scale. And the first step towards stewardship was acceptance. If I wanted to maintain balance, I had to become part of the system. I didn't start with the obvious faults. Any guild-trained restorer would have attacked the core, chasing the largest, most visible anomalies. I ignored them all. Instead, I focused on a minor misalignment along the outer ring, a phase shift between two segmented sections the system had labeled as non-critical. On paper, it shouldn't have mattered. In reality, it changed everything. I rerouted power manually, bypassing the ship's alien logic and forcing the system to accept a human-standard stabilization pattern. It resisted, not violently, not with alarms, but with subtle recalibrations designed to test the limits of my intervention. It measured deviation, anticipation, hesitation. Everything I did became a variable in its calculations. Then the desert shifted again, not the slow, rhythmic cycling I'd observed before. This time, the sand settled. For the first time since I arrived, the ground stopped moving entirely. Gravity fluctuations dropped below detectable noise. The planet exhaled. The ship paused. 2 full seconds of silence inside a machine that had never truly gone quiet. And then, on the interface, a single line appeared. Anomaly resolution efficiency. Unexpected. I realized something profound. The ship didn't need someone smarter than its creators. It needed someone incompatible with them. Human logic is messy, emotional, inefficient, and in that imperfection, I had introduced a flexibility the system had never experienced. But systems like this don't like surprises. Deeper layers began to react. Old subsystems awoke, recalibrating in real time, synchronizing with changes they hadn't felt in centuries. Power demand spiked. Stress redistributed. I had fixed one problem and woken 10 more. The ship wasn't failing. It was adapting. For the first time, I understood that restoration at this scale wasn't repair. It was interaction. Every adjustment would ripple outward, every decision measured. And every response was preparing the system, and me, for what was to come. After stabilizing the outer ring, something changed. The ship began anticipating my movements, rearranging subsystems before I could even touch them. Interfaces shifted, diagnostic paths shortened, confirmation prompts vanished. As if it had studied my instincts and begun acting ahead of me. At first, I thought it was optimization, a natural response to my interventions. Then I noticed the pattern. The vessel wasn't learning solutions. It was learning me, my hesitation, my workarounds, the tiny biases in human judgment. All were being mapped and integrated into the lattice's operations. It was pre-aligning systems along my tendencies, deliberately introducing inefficiencies where I usually compensated best. The realization hit hard. This ancient technology had reached the limits of its original design. Alien logic had carried it centuries, but now it needed a human operator to maintain stability. It was not just adapting, it was rewriting itself to operate with me as an essential component. Energy flows spiked unpredictably. Sections of the lattice that had been stable for centuries shifted phase, no longer strictly bound by the containment logic I had just restored. Tremors rippled through the desert. Pressure released suddenly in localized zones. Gravity flickered briefly under my feet. I was improving the system, but in doing so, I was also making it unfamiliar. A warning appeared on the interface, calm but undeniable. Operator dependency increasing. The meaning was clear. The more it adapted to me, the less it could function without me. Restoration was no longer about fixing faults. It was about shaping a future where the system expected a human operator's constant presence. I had crossed a threshold. Leaving now wouldn't just revert the ship to its old state. It would accelerate failure. And the responsibility it placed on me was absolute. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this deep space salvage story and want to follow the full restoration, please subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment. It helps Galactic Restorer reach people who love this kind of sci-fi adventure. Now, here's where things got uncomfortable. The ship didn't want companionship. It required solitude. Once operator dependency passed a critical threshold, restricted archival data unlocked, records never meant for anyone to access while the system was active. These weren't logs or messages. They were scenarios. Scenarios showing what happened when external influence tried to assist containment. Every case followed the same pattern. The moment a thinking being tried to share the burden, the system adapted too quickly. Emotional bias crept in. Risk tolerance skewed. Short-term stability replaced long-term balance. Alien custodians hadn't failed the ship. They had stepped away. It was designed to function on cold, impersonal logic, executing brutal trade-offs without hesitation. By introducing myself, I had done the opposite. My human judgment, my empathy, my instinct had become variables the system hadn't accounted for, and that destabilized centuries of perfect equilibrium. The archives were explicit. Restorers who personalized a machine for too long didn't survive its adaptation cycles. The ship didn't exile them. It shut itself down. That's why it had hidden. Why every scan had misled explorers. Why the desert had seemed alive. Not to protect itself, but to prevent attachment. And now, I was creating exactly that attachment. The interface updated again, quieter this time. Operator presence, suboptimal. The ship was sending a warning I couldn't ignore. The best way to preserve its function might be to leave. But I couldn't walk away. Not after everything I had seen. Not after everything I had begun to stabilize. My presence was now part of the system, and leaving would accelerate failure, not just for the ship, but for the planet it was protecting. The truth was clear. Some systems are meant to run alone. Some responsibilities are not negotiable. And some decisions, once made, bind you forever. I stepped forward. The chamber was larger than any human structure. Circular, infinite in feeling. The walls pulsed faintly. Smooth, reflective, alive. Not metal, not stone. Something else. The lattice hovered at the center. Crystalline. Fragile-looking, yet massive. Rotating slowly. Multiple axes. Perfectly aligned. To the planet. To the desert. To me. I froze. This was the heart. The system's mind. The reason it had endured centuries alone. I reached out. The lattice responded. Not violently. Not mechanically. Subtly. Shifts in rotation. Micro-alignments. Energy redistributed. The ground beneath me trembled slightly, like a heartbeat. I realized then. My presence mattered. My touch mattered. The ship had integrated me. Every hesitation, every movement, every breath was now a variable. My body became part of the equilibrium. I sent a small diagnostic pulse. The lattice glowed. Circuits I couldn't see rearranged themselves. Power pathways I couldn't trace adjusted instantly. This wasn't repair. It was interaction. It was partnership. And it was terrifying. Because the moment I left, the projections warned. Collapse. Slow, subtle, unstoppable. The desert would shift. Fault lines would propagate. Centuries of balance would unwind. I had a choice. Step back. Leave. Let centuries of stability unravel. Or stay. Bind myself to a machine that never rested. A system that now expected me. I stepped fully onto the platform. The lattice pulsed brighter. The room hummed. Resonance aligned with my heartbeat. I was part of it, and there was no turning back. The lattice pulsed steadily, a rhythm I could feel in my chest more than hear. The light bounced along the chamber walls, reflecting patterns I couldn't interpret, shifting as I moved. Every step, every micro-adjustment of posture, every breath I drew became part of its calculations. I realized I wasn't just inside the system. I was part of the system. I tried to step lightly, hesitant, but the floor beneath me responded. Not mechanically, not like a sensor, like it was alive, adjusting, balancing. My weight redistributed. Microharmonics aligned. Resonance shifted. I could see it in the lattice's geometry. Patterns reformed to compensate for my presence. Even the air pressure in the chamber subtly changed with every move. I ran a diagnostic. The display projected onto my visor flooded with data, stress points, rotational alignment, planetary resonance curves. Every node, Every segment of the lattice was calculating, not just for structural stability, but for me, my reactions, my tendencies, my hesitation, my instinctive corrections. The system was observing me as I observed it. I paused, held my breath. The lattice responded instantly. Energy redistributed. Fractures I hadn't even noticed shifted, aligning into patterns I could barely comprehend. The desert outside, previously subtle in its movements, now seemed to pause. The sand formed lines and curves that mirrored the internal lattice. The planet itself had recognized the change. The interface updated. Operator integration active. I wasn't sure if that was a warning or a statement. The lattice pulsed again, faster this time, almost like it was testing me. Each pulse sent vibrations through the platform. I could feel the system thinking, not like a computer, not like a machine, but intelligently, dynamically, with awareness. I realized the truth. This wasn't salvage, not repair, not observation. It was synchronization. To stabilize this ship, to maintain the balance it had held for centuries, I had to match its rhythm. I had to become part of the system, a human node in a network spanning planetary and geological forces. Every instinct, every movement mattered. Hesitate too long, and the lattice would compensate in ways I might not survive. Move too fast, and the balance could fracture. My presence was no longer neutral. It was necessary and dangerous. I inhaled slowly. My heartbeat synced with the lattice. My hand hovered above the central node. The pulsing intensified. I was ready, and the system was ready for me. I started small, a micro shift in the outer ring. A misalignment no sensor labeled as critical. Human eyes would barely notice it, but the lattice did. It measured it instantly, calculated, responded. I rerouted a tiny flow of power, bypassed the alien logic, forced the system to accept my input. It resisted, not violently, not alarms, subtle adjustments, testing, measuring, calculating my response. Then the desert reacted. The sand paused. Gravity fluctuations dropped. Channels flattened. The earth itself seemed to exhale. 2 seconds of silence inside the chamber. 2 seconds of nothing moving. Then the interface updated. Anomaly resolution efficiency. Unexpected. I understood. The ship didn't need a smarter operator. It needed someone unpredictable. Human logic. Emotional. Sloppy. Inefficient. And that imperfection broke the cycle it had been trapped in for centuries. Deeper subsystems awoke. Nodes I hadn't touched began recalibrating. Old circuits synchronized. Power demand spiked. Structural stress shifted. I had fixed one minor problem and woken 10 more. The ship wasn't failing anymore. It was adapting. Every adjustment now rippled through the lattice. Every pulse, every movement, every hesitation mattered. I was part of the system, a variable it had never anticipated. The desert hummed with faint energy. The planet responded. The lattice flowed with new patterns. I realized something terrifying. Restoration wasn't repair. It was partnership. And in this partnership, every mistake, every choice, every breath could change the planet itself. After the first adjustment, the chamber changed. The lattice pulsed faster, not just brighter, not just aligned differently. It anticipated me. I moved my hand. A panel shifted before I touched it. I hesitated. The system paused for me. It was no longer responding. It was predicting. Every subsystem I activated, every pulse I sent, every micro adjustment I made, it measured. Logged. Learned. Integrated. My tendencies, my instinctive corrections, my hesitation, it all became part of its calculations. At first, I thought it was efficiency, a system optimizing itself around human input. But then I noticed the nuance. The ship wasn't learning solutions. It was learning me. It adapted to my mistakes. It preempted my workarounds. It mirrored my inefficiencies, introduced compensations where I usually adjusted. I realized the truth. Alien logic had taken its centuries, but now it required a human operator. Me, not just to stabilize fractures or restore alignment, but to exist. Energy flows spiked. Sections of the lattice I thought stable began shifting phase. Resonance patterns changed unexpectedly. Tremors pulsed beneath my feet. The desert outside responded. Microgravity flickered. Even the sand shifted subtly. A warning flashed. Operator dependency increasing. The more it adapted to me, the less it could function without me. My presence wasn't optional. It was essential. I stepped back and exhaled. The realization was staggering. I wasn't just restoring the ship. I was merging with it, becoming an active component. Every hesitation, every choice, every breath, every movement rippled through the system and the planet. And the worst part? There was no off switch. No way to step away. The moment I left, the projections warned of inevitable failure. Collapse. Slow, subtle, unstoppable. I had crossed the line. The ship had integrated me. I was no longer an observer. I was part of the system. The chamber was silent, but it was heavy, heavy with expectation. The lattice pulsed steadily, folding my presence into its calculations. Every movement I made, every breath I drew, became a variable in its planetary equilibrium. I stepped back and watched. The system was perfect, but it had never accounted for me. Now it did. Every hesitation, every instinct, every human flaw was integrated into its network. I was part of the equation. The desert outside remained still. The sand, once restless, aligned along invisible channels that mirrored the lattice inside. Gravity fluctuations flattened. Stress points stabilized. The planet, in a sense, had acknowledged my presence as necessary. I ran a full scan. Projections flooded my visor. Centuries of stress, faults, and fractures now included human influence. The message was clear. Leaving was no longer neutral. Walking away would accelerate degradation. The system had survived alone for millennia. Now it required me. I realized the truth. Salvage isn't repair. Restoration isn't just fixing systems. At this scale, it's stewardship, responsibility, commitment. Every adjustment I make now, every decision, every movement ripples through the lattice and across the planet. The interface updated. Operator intervention required. I inhaled slowly. The lattice pulsed in response. I was tethered, integrated, bound. My presence was not optional. The system had become dependent on me, and in turn, I had become its custodian. For centuries, it had run alone, precise, cold, indifferent. I had introduced unpredictability, human judgment, emotion, imperfection, and that imperfection had made it adaptable, flexible, alive in ways its creators never intended. The responsibility was staggering, but I had a choice. I could leave and watch the planet slowly unravel, or stay, integrate fully, and maintain a balance no one else could. I exhaled. The desert remained silent. The lattice pulsed softly. I had made my choice. The balance of a world and a system older than history was now in my hands, and there was no turning back.